Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to an utterly unplanned episode of the Tribble Timewarp. I hadn't been planning to film the Blockade Run scenario just yet. I wanted to run it a few times to get a feel for it before I did the video. Then I ran into these guys and found myself scrambling for the record button on Fraps, which is why we're beginning this in medias res. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the Tholians. This is the first new antagonist group we have had in a fair while. I'm trying to think when we had the last one, and I honestly can't remember. I actually can't even remember if it was the Breen or the Davidians that came along last. It might have been the Fekleri. Anyway, it has been a long while. So, the Tholians. These guys have appeared in a couple of Star Trek episodes. Enterprise in a Mirror Darkly, parts 1 and 2, the original series The Tholian Web, and I believe they had almost a bit part in another Enterprise episode, Future Tense. Anyway, they have several party pieces, and possibly the most signature one is this, the Tholian Web. It will encase a ship, and if you attempt to cross it, you will take colossal damage and fail horribly. It is not recommended to try and batter your way out of this. If you look, you will see that there are little targets called web nodes at the corners of the web where the triangular sections meet. Those are what you need to kill to bring down individual sections of the web. They haven't got too many hit points, so beam fire at will or cannon scatter volley are likely your best bets there. They're widely enough spaced that things like scatter volley or tricobalt torpedoes aren't likely to kill more than one or two. Unfortunately, we're running the Blockade Run scenario, and as you can see, the freighters are not smart enough to avoid the web. They plough right into it and start taking damage. However, it is a very nice signature move, and it very definitely gives the Tholians a different flavour. Besides that, they are primarily a Tetrion-based race, as well as the web. They also chuck out web walls. Those are individual entities that can be killed rather than having to target nodes, and they also open rifts to the mirror universe. As though you weren't boned enough already, you have Federation analog cruisers and science vessels turning up as well. That's actually quite a nice continuity nod. If you really want to know where that's coming from, go and watch In a Mirror Darkly. Actually, go and watch In a Mirror Darkly anyway. It's probably the best of the Enterprise episodes, although I'm not sure what it says about Enterprise that two of their best episodes, in fact, came from entirely dumping the basic premise of the series. I was not a great fan of Enterprise, as you can probably guess. They also chuck out something called a heavy disruption torpedo. This looks like a little three-way bolus. That was a light version that just skidded past us there. And as far as I can tell, these are either a viral matrix or a power drain served on top. I get hit by these at a couple of points in the video, and it basically zonks my weapon power down to nothing, which is unfortunate because I was stuck inside a web at a time, and having the phasers online would have been really handy at that precise moment. Veering off topic for a second, let's go over the basics of the Blockade Run. This is the scenario you'll probably be doing most often to get access to fleet marks, be it for upgrading your starbase or buying the fleet-specific gear that is supposedly coming with Season 6 once the starbases have reached a certain level of upgrades. You'll have noticed, if you've watched my earlier video on the fleet interface, that the engineering and science tracks in particular made reference to Mark 12 fleet-specific gear, as well as, it must be noted, some fleet-specific ship variants, which will presumably require a truly obscene number of these marks. The other ways you can get these for reference are 1. The no-win scenario, 2. Colony defense, and 3. The 15-man fleet starbase defense scenario. I suspect, as I've said, this one is going to be the one that's most commonly run. It's accessed through the PvE queue, as you would expect, and requires 5 players. When you warp into the scenario, you'll appear at your starbase, which is in the centre of the map, and you'll get a minute or so to get yourself organised and sorted out. Once that minute expires, you will have 15 minutes during which freighters will warp in from the 8 nav points dotted around the starbase and will attempt to fly towards your starbase and drop off their cargo. Each time a freighter succeeds, you get 1 or 2 fleet marks, and generally all is happy, except, of course, each freighter that warps in is pursued by a pack of enemies, who usually have sufficient firepower to shred the freighter before it gets more than a few kilometres, unless you intervene, and sometimes even if you do intervene. The problem is, of course, that the nav points are so widely spaced that if you're going around it as a group of 5, and there goes Juliet, oh dear, at least she didn't need to take the poison this time. If you are attempting to do it as a single monolithic group of 5, you're going to wind up leaving 6 or 7 of the nav points uncovered at any given time. So you wind up splitting your group and trying to cover as many as you can. Now, if you had to actually destroy the incoming enemies, this would be a problem. You don't. The attacking groups will warp out the moment the freighter they are chasing either dumps its cargo and warps away, or that the freighter is destroyed. You'll probably kill a few along the way, to be honest, but frankly, it's not one of those things that you need to do. This will, if you're smart, play into your selection of bridge officer powers for this mission. You'll notice that I've got this ship rigged with 2 cases of tractor repulsors, multiple shield and hull repairs, to the extent that I'm running 2 copies of hazard emitters, 1 and 3, and relatively light firepower, even by the standards of a science vessel. I'm emphasising area attacks to deal with the Tholian webs, and if I can stop pranging into them, that would make it even better. By contrast, of course, single target damage abilities like, for example, beam overload, torpedo high yield, cannon rapid fire, are comparatively ill-suited for this scenario. You don't really need to kill individual vessels, you just need to get them mad at you rather than the freighter, so the freighter can get away. You also need to be tough enough to survive the inevitable reprisals, so this is a scenario that I think is going to favour science vessels and cruisers. Carriers in particular are going to have a rough time of it. I have tried this scenario with an Aatrox class carrier, and it wasn't particularly pretty. The Aatrox turned so badly that if a group popped in a couple of nodes behind me, it was basically impossible to get the carrier turned round and engaged properly before the freighter exploded. If you were working as a more coordinated team, then you can argue that the Aatrox would stay more or less centre field and simply send in fighters and shield repair drones to support the freighters while other players in escorts and science vessels engaged and distracted the enemy. However, that's still theoretical. I haven't had a chance to actually try it yet. In terms of other ship classes, science vessels are going to have a fairly good time of it, particularly the Intrepid variants, because they're almost as manoeuvrable as escorts, but they've actually got the crowd control and the durability in terms of their shield tanking and the sheer number of science powers they get to actually stabilise a freighter group long enough for the rest of the team to get involved and help out. So, as you'll see typically here, I'm the first ship in, I'm the first responder to a given freighter group, and it's a case of deploying tractor repulsors to just shove the enemy out of range. And I don't know what happened there, some weird kind of display bug with the web, but who cares, it seems to have more or less fallen over anyway. And enough repair abilities to keep the freighter intact while we're doing so. Of course, since this is the Intrepid retrofit, I have the luxury, in addition, of popping the ablative generator as a panic button if I really get in over my head, although that's only really been necessary once or twice. Other ships that I would expect to do well in this scenario are the Armitage, particularly if you load it up with runabouts or shield repair drones and point it at either the enemy or the freighter as needed. and the Nebula, because that, while not as manoeuvrable as the Intrepid, does of course have the Lieutenant Universal Station, so it can go even heavier on the engineering powers if it feels the need, and if it can't quite deploy the same number of science powers in that setup, it can at least get tractor repulsors and gravity well into play to dictate where the enemy pursuit groups go over the course of the fight. As far as tweaks to this scenario go, there are, I think, two that come to mind. The first is to have either the Starbase control officers or your own science officer tell you which waypoint a freighter has warped in from. You can argue this in all kinds of ways, mostly from long-range sensors. What I've noticed in other runs, and to a lesser extent in this one, is that if you clear the area out, you are reduced to doing an orbit of the waypoints in an effort to look for red blips on your own map. Simply having the Starbase pop and say a freighter has warped in at point H or point D goes a long way towards alleviating that and leaving you guessing which points are the subject of a battle at any given moment. The second change that I would make concerns the radio chatter that is supposed to be coming from the freighters, and you just heard a little sample of it then. These messages play all the way through the scenario, and ironically enough will even do it during the scenario's briefing minute, where there are no freighters engaged at all. It is essentially a background soundtrack at the moment. The way I would prefer to see it played, and for those of you who are wondering what a heavy disruption torpedo does, there's your answer. Look at what just happened to my weapons and my engines. Yeah, it's not pretty if those hit you. Anyway, freighter audio. There are three basic messages they play. The first one seems to be, we're in system, making a run for the starbase, keep the enemy off our backs. The second one is the, we're not going to make it message, and the third one is the, dropping our cargo message. There you are, that's one of them. Rather than having them play essentially at random, or at least what feels like it's at random, I'd be inclined to tie them to specific triggers for each freighter. So when a freighter warps in, have it play the making our run message. When its shields go down or its hull goes below 50%, we're not going to make it. When it starts dropping its cargo and, or maybe gets 50% through its progress bar, or maybe even warps out, dropping our cargo, warping out, cheers for the assist. And just have it play to ships within 10 kilometers of the freighter. There they go again. Now, we know the engine can handle positional audio. If you've ever been to Wolf 359, you will know that the audio from the memorial only plays when you're within a certain distance of it. Ditto, I believe, if you go to the Romulus system. Again, the memorial there plays radio chatter when you're within a certain range. Is it possible, I have to wonder, is it possible for Cryptic's audio engine to tie a sound source to a particular ship in that particular manner? So the radio messages only play if you're within 10 kilometers of a ship, and perhaps adjusts the volume as well, depending on your range. It ought to be possible. I mean, if you think about it, phasers, weapons fire, torpedo impacts, dozens of little effects like that all run on the same basic thing. They are all moving positional sound sources. So I can't see why it isn't possible, but I don't know how Cryptic's sound engine works, so hey, who knows? Something to consider. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we should probably consider bringing this video to a close, especially since there's only 20 seconds left on the clock. Unfortunately, when that timer hits 0, any freighters that have started don't play by mastermind rules. They simply warp out and don't try to drop their cargo. So Delta here isn't going to get through unless we're very, very lucky. Nope, there we go. So 16 out of 21. Considering that we spent the first minute or so of the scenario with our jaws on the floor, that's not too shabby a performance at all. The Tholians are a new and interesting opponent group. I imagine we'll get more used to them as we get more time with them, and if I can get more footage, I will endeavour to supply it to you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll see you next time.